Alright, so as you recall, we looked at creating a rapid prototype web page with Yeoman and Twitter Bootstrap, and that was our last video, and we elected to use boilerplate, or rather vanilla CSS, when Yeoman asked us whether we wanted to use Compass and Sass. We opted out, but this time let's go ahead and look at Compass and Sass. We'll take a look outside of the Yeoman ecosystem. It's probably useful to look at these things directly first, become familiar with them. So if you've installed Yeoman, you actually have Compass and Sass installed because Yeoman verifies that before it lets you have a successful install. So sure enough, yes, we have Sass and Compass installed. Let's generate a new Compass project with Compass create test and cd into test. So now if we look at what happened, we generated a bunch of files here, and we got some directions. We'll ignore those for now. But let's open this up in our text editor and have a look. So we've got a Sass directory and a style sheets directory, and we can see the names of our files correspond with just different file extensions. .scss is the Sass extension that we're using, and then .css are the files that get generated. There's a config.rb, which turns out to be pretty important if you're going further with this. Basically just maps directories in this case, because everything else here is commented out. We won't get into all the configuration options, but the ones I want you to look at here, CSS directory is style sheets, and our Sass directory is Sass. Makes sense, that's what we saw on the file system. And before I get into actually coding stuff up, I just want to say that Sass is the language that we're using, the preprocessor language, and ability to compile that into CSS, whereas Compass is a framework and tool around Sass that that gives you a workflow. Like, as you recall, we said Compass create test. So that's a workflow thing that Compass is giving you, and we'll see some other stuff later. But just so you're not confused, Sass is the language and the ability. Sass has the compiler and generates the CSS from the Sass and all that stuff. Compass is the framework and tool that we're using around it. So if we look at this screen.css we're in, we see one line. The rest of this is just a comment, but this line here is an import. Imports the reset. And sure enough, when we open up the corresponding screen.css, we see what looks to be a CSS reset, right? So that one line gave us that. And what we can do is comment that line out, save the file. Actually, let's go over here and start our Compass watch. Okay, so now Compass is watching any changes made here. We save, and you can see, well, I'd already saved, so not much has happened, but our reset's been removed from here. So if I put that back in, you can see Compass watch is rewriting to the file, and we're going to see our resets back in there. So let's take that, let's comment that out for now, and take a look at some of the core language features in Sass. First thing I think is pretty neat is variables. You don't get variables in true variables in CSS, right? But in Sass, I can do something like this and use this variable, and this will expand to hex 999. This can be seen there. Pretty neat stuff. I can also add hex. So in hex, after 9 isn't 10, it's A, B, and C. So sure enough, that's reflected in the generated CSS. Let's just try 4. We expect to see D and so on, right? That's pretty neat. You can imagine defining all your headers and constants at the top of your file for a website early on, and then just use these variables and not have to worry about going and changing things in a million different places. Another neat thing that you get from Sass is nesting. So you can imagine in a typical CSS, you'll have this kind of stuff, right? And you'll keep defining out like that, and it gets to pretty ugly and unruly. In Sass, I can just use nested blocks like this, right? And this isn't legal CSS syntax, but Sass will take care of generating the correct CSS for us with that. So that's nice. It becomes a lot easier to reason about your code. You know, this can be abused as well, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. So we've looked at variables and some basic math. And by the way, with the math, you can do a lot more interesting stuff like calculating the dimensions of pages with percentages and m's and things like that. We won't get into that here, but it's available. We've looked at nested blocks, and let's have a look at mix-ins. So a mix-in is easiest to describe by just showing you. So you use this ampersand mix-in keyword, and then your identifier, and we're going with my font, and then you can create some font stuff. We'll say size is 14 pixels. Family is times whatever, right? So now if we save that, we can, or actually, we need to use it. So to use the mix-in, we use @include and then the name of the mix-in. And so those are two keywords that you have to use when you define the mix-in, the @mix-in, and when you use it, you include it. So what we're hoping will happen here is that all of this will expand in here. So sure enough, if we have a look, that's what happened, right? So our my font stuff expanded in here. So that's really cool. You can imagine with all the confusing CSS3 syntax for box shadows and border radiuses and things like that, this makes life a lot easier. And in fact, Compass and even Twitter Bootstrap define a lot of really neat mix-ins. We'll have a look at those later, but it's just a great feature to have available when you're dealing with your CSS. So that covers the core topics I wanted to look at with Sass and using Compass. We'll maybe get a little deeper into some of the mix-ins we just discussed. Maybe we'll look at border radius and box shadow and some of those things in a future screencast. But I think this is enough to sort of get you started with Compass and Sass. And hopefully the next video we'll be able to return to seeing how that's used in Yeoman.